Hello everyone, Deacon Ed McCormick here, and welcome to the fifth Sunday of Easter. This Sunday, in the Gospel from John, we hear Jesus encourage us to not let our hearts be troubled. He says to us, "Do not be afraid." Now, these days we seem to have a lot to be afraid of. As of this morning, over 78,000 people have died from the coronavirus. And any one of us can get sick. So many people have lost their jobs or are afraid of losing their jobs. And people are struggling to get food on the table and pay their bills. So there's lots of reasons to be afraid. Now, fear is a response that should move us to protect ourselves against a threat. It's a good thing to feel fear, but it means responding wisely to a threat. And so we wear masks. And we wash our hands, and we keep physically distant. That's wise. That's a wise approach to responding to the fear of getting the virus. But here's the problem. We seem to be living in a society that constantly promotes fear and anxiety. Some thinkers today say that we live in an age of fear. And let's face it, there are lots of radio personalities and websites and politicians and a lot of our friends and family that can promote this constant state of fear and suspicion. And when that happens, it is difficult to act wisely. Instead, we start to live, you could say, in a house of fear. We fear the virus. We fear immigrants. We fear people of color. We fear everything. It's as if when we live in this house of fear, that we're living from a feeling of scarcity, as if there's not enough to go around. And the underlying belief that drives this fear is just that. There aren't enough jobs. There's not enough masks. There's not enough medicine or clean water to go around. And so in the house of fear, people living out of a belief in scarcity become suspicious and angry and seek to blame other people and other groups. But Jesus tells us today to not be afraid, to not let our hearts be troubled. Well, why not? I think it's a legitimate question to ask Jesus that. Why not be afraid? And here's what he tells us. He says that he has prepared a place for us in his Father's house. And the Father's house is a house of abundance, not of fear. Now, the Father's house used to be the temple in Jerusalem. But here's what I want you to understand today. The Father's house, this house of abundance that Jesus invites us into, is the Christian community when we gather together. We are the Father's house that Jesus has prepared. We are this community of abundance. This claim and this invitation requires that we reimagine our Christian life and our parish life so that we begin to see what it would be like to live out of the abundance that is Jesus Christ. So let's do this. Let's see if we can reimagine the Christian life, our local Christian communities, the church around the world as living out of the abundance of Christ's life. In the gospel, Jesus promises us the following. He says, I will come back again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you also may be. Listen to that. What a promise. He says, I will come to you and take you to myself. I love this expression. I love this expression of the risen Jesus coming to us and taking him into himself. I want you to imagine this week the risen Jesus coming to you, coming to your life, into your home, into your relationships, into your job, and experiencing him taking you into himself and his life. He's not taking you away. No, he's taking you into himself and his life. And then in the same passage, Jesus tells us, the Father is in him and he is in the Father. To be taken into Jesus is to encounter the inexhaustible and overflowing life of God. It is to know God's peace and truth and freedom. Now remember last week when Jesus spoke about the shepherd going into the sheep pen and bringing the sheep out and leading them to an abundant life? This is that life that he was talking about. Remember when the risen Jesus appeared to the terrified disciples in the upper room? What happened? He was present to them, alive with them, offering them shalom, peace, forgiving them, freeing them from their fear, filling them with joy, and empowering them to live from the life of the Spirit. That's the Father's house. That's the house of abundance that we are invited to live in and live from. You know, in this new house, in this house of abundance, we receive new hearts and new minds. Our relationships are restored. New kinds of relationships are created. New systems and situations that make abundant life available emerge out of this new house. A whole new kind of existence becomes possible. My friends, I just think this cannot be said enough. God, through the risen Jesus, is creating a new kind of reality, a new kind of existence, a community and a people who live from the abundance of the life of Christ. This is the life we're invited into. Now, I understand that most of us seem to move between the house of fear and worry and suspicion and the house of abundance. But this Easter, I think that the Lord is inviting us to make a conscious effort to say yes to his invitation to live out of that abundant life. Could you imagine what would happen to our marriages and our families and friendships and our parish if we lived out of this abundance of Jesus' life with the Father? Could you imagine if our worldwide church, if all Christians around the world started to live out of this abundant life? We would do amazing things. And you know, at the end of this passage from John chapter 14, Jesus says the following. He says, if you live from this abundant life, you will do greater things than me. The works you will do will be greater than mine. That's an amazing statement, but a sign that we are living out of this abundant life is our desire to share it with others. Just as Jesus shares his abundant life with us, when we start to live from that, we will be compelled to want to share it with other people. Just as Jesus welcomed us into his life, we will want to be a people of welcome and hospitality. This week, the Acts of the Apostles recounts this incident where the disciples learned that widows of Greek heritage were going hungry. And so in response, the disciples appointed 7 Greek-speaking disciples to care for these widows. This is what sharing the abundant life of Christ looks like. When St. Paul learned that Christians in Jerusalem were suffering through a famine, he raised funds from all the Christian communities in modern-day Turkey and Greece, so that out of their abundance, they could support Christians in need, knowing that in the future, if they were in need, those Christians who were now in need, but one day may live out of abundance, would share that with those who just gave something to them. You see, when we live out of the abundant life of Christ, we stop living out of fear and suspicion and worry and condemnation. Instead, we start to offer this abundant life to people in all kinds of forms. And today, perhaps it means offering them clean water and fresh food and health care. This is why our parish supports our sister parish in Haiti. Out of our abundance, we have supported them. This is why we have been conducting this food drive to support people who are hungry in our local community. So my friends, this Easter, I think it's very clear that the Lord is calling us to leave that house of fear and suspicion and scarcity and come live out of His abundant life, the life that He wants all of us to know and share.